Good evening. I'm going to call the meeting, the December 2018 meeting of the BET to order, 6:34. Everyone, please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge of allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay. The first item on our agenda this evening, we have two non-routine items, budget items detailed on the meeting agenda. The first item, ED 8, education, 217,000 additional appropriation for GHS water damage. Can I have a motion?
So moved.
Move.
Okay, this item has been moved by Mr. Raymer, seconded by Ms. Tarkington. Ms. Moriarty, can you please give the Budget Committee report?
Yes, this item was presented by Mr. Mayo and Mr. Watson last week at the Board of BET meeting, Budget Committee. It's a request for an additional appropriation to cover the water damage in the mechanical room that's in the basement of the science wing at Greenwich High School. The dollar amount is $217,000. This amount is estimated to cover the cost of the repair that resulted from a bad gasket on the heat exchanger. The water accumulation caused significant damage to the sewage pump and other pieces of equipment in that room. The maintenance department quickly responded, getting the sewage system back in operation. Currently, the science wing does not have access to hot water. The town does expect that the majority of the expense will be covered by insurance, subject to $25,000, and the depreciation clause really on the insurance, in that you can replace it with a like piece of equipment, not necessarily a new and improved model. The Board of Ed needed to begin their work immediately and use funds from their operating budget to cover the cost of these repairs. This appropriation, if approved by the BET and the RTM, would restore those funds from the capital and non-recurring account. The insurance proceeds, when the town receives them, would then go into the capital and non-recurring fund. The current balance of our capital and non-recurring fund is $10.8 million, as we see in our treasurer's report, but the BET has approved several interim items to date in this fiscal year that will go against that fund. Doesn't look like much spending has occurred on any of those items, but we do have sufficient funds to cover this, is the reason I mentioned that. The vote was 4-0-0 to recommend approval of the additional appropriation.
Thank you, Ms. Moriarty. Thank you, Ms. Moriarty. We're joined tonight by members of the Greenwich Public Schools Administration and the Board of Education. Mr. Bernstein, Mr. Mayo, Mr. Watson, would any of you like to add anything to that?
Good evening. I'm going to have Dan just update you on the progress we made on the GHS mechanical room.
Okay. First of all, there is a limited amount of hot water available to the school. When the system was designed, there was a secondary system that allowed us to close some valves, open some other valves. So there is hot water to the classrooms, to the laboratories, to the bathrooms. It's a situation where you would have to leave the sink running for a while, so it's not very economical, but there is hot water in case it is needed. As far as progress, parts and equipment have been ordered. Some of these units are not off-the-shelf unit, especially the unit that failed. And I would like to make one comment. You stated that a gasket had failed. That is our opinion. We're still waiting on experts from risk management bringing in somebody to review the system. And we'll keep you updated as we move along, but we're kind of at a holding place right now until all the parts are in. Thank you.
Thank you. I'd like to open it up for discussion. Does anyone have any? Ms. Vasiliotis.
The part that's probably taking the longest is the actual unit that failed. We heard this morning that it's probably 2 to 3 weeks out as of Friday. So we're into the first of the year. So we're expecting everything, all systems to be back up and checked by the end of January at the latest.
Any further questions for the Board of Ed while they're here? Okay. Thank you all for being here this evening. If there are no,
Thanks, Jill.
thank you. If there are no further questions, I'm going to call for a vote on this item. So this is a motion for an additional appropriation in the amount of $217,000 to address the Greenwich High School water damage claim. It was moved by Mr. Raymer, seconded by Ms. Tarkington. All in favor, please say aye and raise your hands. Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? That item has carried 12-0-0. Thank you for being here. Thank you. The second item on our agenda is the release of conditions contribution to GEMS in the amount of $2,371,825,000. Can I have a motion to move this item forward? Second. Okay, item has been moved by Mr. Raymer and seconded by Ms. Tarkington. Ms. Moriarty, can you give the Budget Committee report?
Yes, as in last week at the Budget Committee meeting, 2 members of the GEMS administration attended and discussed their operating performance. As in previous years, the BET has placed a condition to release the town's contribution to GEMS in 2 stages. So last week, GEMS provided a mid-year update during our meeting. They reported on their operating statistics, highlighting their performance. They are operating within their budget, controlling salary expense, and increasing their training efforts. They have continued their successful fundraising efforts for the capital needs, which is not supplied by the town. The committee voted 4-0-0 to recommend release of the conditions.
Thank you, Ms. Moriarty. Are there any questions or discussion on this item? Okay, hearing none, this is a release of conditions moved by Mr. Raymer, seconded by Ms. Tarkington. All in favor, please raise your hand and say aye. 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 Any opposed? Any abstentions? That item has carried 12-0-0 as well. Thank you as well for being here this evening.
Tracy passes along her apologies for not making it.
Well, happy holidays. Thank you. Okay. That concludes our budget items for the evening. Item 3 on our agenda is the assessor's report. Ms. Elliott is here this evening.
Good evening, Madam Chair and fellow members of the BET. I'd like to present the assessor's report for December 2018. First of all, we are getting ready to send out the second half of the real estate bills in January, as well as the motor vehicle supplemental tax bills. The assessor's office has entered all the new owners to the real estate bills, and the motor vehicle, as I mentioned last month, the supplemental motor vehicle list is ready to go as well. So they should be out shortly. We are currently completing the 2018 personal property grand list. And due to the number of non-filers this year, we shall start, after I finish with the personal property list, we shall start choosing randomly the accounts that we are going to audit this year. We have had a number of companies that have filed in the past that have all of a sudden stopped filing. We are going to emphasize and look to the larger accounts. We are certainly not going to worry about auditing a dog walker or some small business. That's not our concern. Our concern is to get some of these larger businesses that have not filed in a while and just audit to make sure that they are still declaring all their business personal property to us appropriately. Okay. As I mentioned in the first paragraph of the report, that I've been somewhat conservative as to the growth of the grand list this year. I think we originally came out with 0.2% of an increase. The reason I've been very conservative is that this grand list, we've had a number of large one-time reductions to the grand list. That being said, I think it's fair to say that the grand list will probably go up somewhere between 0.2 that I originally and 0.5% at least. I'm still a little hesitant to give you that number as we're still wrapping up the grand list calculations, but I will have that number by the beginning to mid-January. So our growth this year hopefully will not be as conservative as I originally thought. Okay. Anybody have any questions for me this evening?
Mr. Raymer.
I'll just speak on my microphone for some reason. Do all the microphones not work?
Yeah, they're not working.
Okay. I was asked the question beforehand, that as you go through this auditing process, how long will that take? Is that something you're going to be doing over the upcoming months or a year, or what's involved?
Well,
The question really was, what tax year will it affect? Will it be something which is in place for the tax bills and that we're sending out at the end of June, or is that more likely to affect the following tax year?
the way audits work, the statutes actually allow us, and I'm not quite sure, once we actually have the audit, it depends on how quickly the businesses are going to respond to our request, number one. I'm going to start it as soon as I sign the grand list, which is the end of January, sometime in the beginning of February, and start. So I'm sure that we will actually have some accounts audited quite quickly. I'm sure it won't be that hard. We do have the ability through statute to actually go back and add it on to prior years if we find that they have underreported a significant amount. I'm not sure about that yet. I'll take that on as a case-by-case basis, but as they come in, I can add them onto this grand list. If we can actually get some audits done prior to June, we will certainly add that to the grand list for the July billing. Depending upon how quickly we get to this or how quickly the businesses respond, it depends. Usually we have about 1,600 non-filers. I would imagine that we will do 50 to 75 accounts this year, about that amount. And then next year, we'll continue this process over the next few years. And hopefully by then, we will also get a lot of the non-filers to actually start filing.
Thank you.
Mr. Drake.
It worked. We're all for auditing those who don't report. How do you select the targets for audit in a way that no one can accuse it
I take
of?
them randomly. So what
How random, or how do you do
Yes,
it?
so what I'm going to do is I'm going to basically take out, for instance, all the accounts less than $100,000. I'm not going to really worry about those. And then I'll have to look and see how many we have. And then we'll just start randomly picking every fifth account, or there's a way that we can randomly do it. So it doesn't look, I don't want to, I want it to be done randomly and
Ms. Moriarty.
I saw there was some activity on 6 of the residential cases. Would you like to update us on?
So we're getting to the point, we actually, let's see, last month we settled 6 residential cases. I actually have a pretrial this Friday for one larger commercial property. We've actually been able to settle the residential cases. It's taken us a little bit longer because we're waiting for certain discovery to be offered to us. And once we do, it's as the trial dates come up, that's how we seem to be settling a lot more of them, as some of the taxpayers don't really want to take this to trial, nor so that's how we are ultimately settling some of these.
Okay. Are there any other questions for Ms. Elliott?
I move that we approve or accept the assessor's report.
Okay. So we have a motion by Ms. Tarkington, seconded by Mr. Raymer, to accept the assessor's report. All in favor, please say aye and raise your hand. Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? That item has carried 12-0-0. Thank you very much. Okay, which brings us to the Comptroller's report. Mr. Mynarski is here this evening.
Good evening, Madam Chair, VET members. Start on page 1, the financial software RFP. This is a contract we've had for about 20 years, and we haven't gone out to bid. And the contract is up June 30th, so it's time that we go out. We don't have any complaints with Munis, but a little bit of the history on Munis. For some of the members that haven't been around, we used to do the payroll through Munis, and we did an RFP 5 years ago and went to ADP, Automatic Data Processing. We also, about 3 years ago, The previous assessor and collector were not particularly happy with the tax collector and tax assessment modules, so we did an RFP, and we ended up with Quality Data Systems. So it's just time. We want to look at it. One of the points that I want to bring out, actually, Roland wanted me to bring it to your attention as part of the Board of Education Capital Projects Review. During his interviews, he's had conversations with Jeff Ziplo? Jeff Ziplo. I think a number of you have met him and been interviewed. He's basically reported that Munis is the only thing that's really out there as far as municipalities in the state of Connecticut. So I'm really curious to see who's going to respond to this and who's going to be competitive with Munis. But that'll be issued at the end of December, and we'll see who's out there to compete with Munis. I'll do a couple more, and then I'll open up the questions. On page 7, we have the borrowing. We're going to market next month. We're going to do a $40 million bond issuance, $60 million bond anticipation note bands issuance. The credit reviews are January 3rd, start in the late morning. There's 2 of them, Moody's and S&P. They usually go about an hour and a half each, so it would be about 3 hours. The BET is interested in the past, and they attend. It'll be upstairs in the Hayton Room, and I'll give you send you also the presentation in advance, so you know what we're going to do as far as a walkthrough. Vacancies, on pages 7 and 8, we have 1 vacancy left. That's for the accounts payable supervisor, who just cleared all the background checks, the credit checks, et cetera. He's starting Monday, January 14th. And that will only leave 1 potential vacancy. Kathleen Murphy, the treasurer, who has told us for the last 2 or 3 years she's leaving every January, has finally made it official. One of the things, and we'll talk about it later when we talk about the audit and the management letter, is succession planning. We've got key positions in the department that we back up. Roland's got adequate backup with Angela Gencarelli. Kathleen Murphy has adequate backup with Natasha. And we're going to start the process where in the first week of January, we'll have an office temp coming in, and she will be going through a transition period for 4 or 5 weeks. And effectively, she'll be leaving February 1st. And we have the option that we could, as an HR, human resources policy, that if we need to bring her back, we could bring her back for up to 15 hours a week for a couple-month period. I'm sure that you've heard of situations. Ron Lally in Parking Services is one example where we've brought someone back. Ron Lally is our former internal auditor turned risk manager. So that's basically it with some of the talking points. I'll open it up to the controller's reports. Some of the highlights in the controller's reports are going to be discussed later, but I'll open it up to questions. Mr. Weisberg.
So one question is the investment in U.S. Treasuries. I think it's a part of your report. Do you know the status? I think when the IAC, when the Investment Advisory Committee met on this on Thursday, it was on the cusp of getting approved. Do you know if it's been, I haven't heard if it's been approved, but.
As of 4 o'clock this afternoon, when I did a walkthrough with Kathleen Murphy and Natasha, it's same status. It's on the cusp. It's almost been approved. As of 4 o'clock, it hasn't.
Ms. Hess.
Hey, so on the Munis and the RFP, I just want to clarify, confirm, when you talk about financial reporting software, you're going to look at all the capabilities that Munis has and all of the modules, not just specifically just sort of the accounting piece of it, as part of the RFP?
Yes, exactly. Everything that they offer.
Okay.
I'll tell you a story. 5 years ago, we did the payroll RFP, and there was three finalists. It was ADP, Ceridian, and Munis. Munis was the incumbent, and we had been with Munis for years. And as a matter of fact, the presentations were in this room. And when Munis came and did their presentation, the former IT director sat next to me, and after the presentation was over, he turned to me and he said, I didn't even know Munis can do that, which was strange because we were using an outdated payroll module, and nobody took the time to actually look and see if there was anything that had changed over the years. That's a very good question. That's exactly one of the reasons why we want to do this, is to look at what's out there, not only from the competitors, but to see if they've got any new state-of-the-art products that we could work with. And I'll talk about it. I was going to talk about it later, but during the audit committee conferences, one of the GASB pronouncements that's going to come out is lease reporting. That is a huge project. I mean, we don't even know how many leases are out there as far as all the details that go into the leases. We have to go through all the bills and come up with an inventory of leases. And that's one of the modules that we think is out there that we could feed into the system so that we're ready for the GASB pronouncement that comes up in 2 years, which could be implemented a year early.
So to give other BET members who were not at the audit committee a little bit of background, there's a GASB rule that will require municipalities to report their lease
Correct.
assets.
Yeah.
Right. So, Ms. Tarkington.
I'm sorry, what was?
The lease accounting includes both account acting as lessee and lessor.
We're the lessee. We would be on the lessee reporting end of it.
So we're not.
No. I think where you're going, are you going into the area of where we lease parts of our operations, like at the senior center, the civic center, it's it's the lessee piece of it, yes.
I just wanted to clarify the discussion on the units. The assessor's department did use units, but it used in my guess. I'm sorry, is it on there?
The mics don't work.
I don't know. Mine doesn't work.
Selectively silenced
We use it for the assessment administration, not for the revaluation or whatever. That was a separate module profile, and I think we'd used it for, a couple of decades. I wanted to make that comment. Pete, I didn't see a copy of the retirement board flash report with this. Is this coming soon, or?
I actually got it late last week. I will send it to you. I will send it out up when I go upstairs after the meeting, or tomorrow morning. I'll send it first thing tomorrow morning.
In your report, you commented about the custodian for the retirement board, but the custodian is actually NB. I think it's the sub-custodian to NB is National Financial Services.
Yes.
So that's
Yeah.
Well, I think it's both sub-custodian
Ms. Moriarty?
Your report referenced the record keeper for the DP and DC plan, and that you expect the contract with Transamerica to be able to be completed by 12/31. Do you have an update? Is that going to, will you need to extend their time further? The record keeper.
That's a no, right? He's eating. This is, actually,
I
the
warned you
question
about
was
that,
asked
sorry.
this afternoon. Two pieces are live, is the 401K on the DC, the 457, and the piece that's not live. When I talked about it as another walkthrough previous in the morning with Roland, was the DB was in its final stages of testing.
Testing, and the first payment to the retirees will be in the January payment.
So to answer your question, assuming everything goes right in the next couple of weeks, they still have one responsibility, is Transamerica has to issue the 1099-Rs, which by law have to go out before this January 31st. So because they've gathered all the data and as part of the contract, that's the one duty that they will be doing after January 1st. Everything else is done.
Ms. Vasiliotis?
Pete, I noticed on the school
Glenville School, Glenville School, as far as the school construction reimbursement piece, the way it works is the state of Connecticut has retainage. It's got down a little bit. I think it's gone up a little bit. But I put the dollar amount in there. I think it was $342,000. We don't get that until the state of Connecticut comes and audits the project. So that could, no, the answer a couple of years ago was budget cuts, staffing cuts in the audit office of the state of Connecticut. I have no idea about the status of when they're going to come to audit. The issues that we have now that we're dealing is when are we going to get our reimbursements for New Lebanon? When are we going to get our reimbursements for MESA? But as far as Hamilton and Glenville, we're more at the mercy of them coming to us to audit. So I don't have an answer for when.
Okay. Any additional questions for Mr. Mynarski?
Well, just
Yes,
to follow up
Mr.
on New
Deuce.
Lab. Yeah, your report mentions, Peter, that we've not received the November reimbursement yet, and these are big bucks. The other two, if I recall, came in on time or a little bit early. Perhaps Bill has an answer.
I can answer, but I'll defer to Mr. Drake.
Peter? Or I was just,
And I made it clear in there.
Yeah.
The first two came, the way it worked, starting the year, the calendar year, we were supposed to get every 2 months. We got January and we got March. And then when the May one was supposed to come in, there was computer glitches at the state of Connecticut. And I made it clear in the audit reports in the summer that it was not our side, it was the state's.
Right.
The glitches cleared out in September. So what happened was we were supposed to get back on the 2-month cycle, which would have been in November. Roland and I met with Lori O'Donnell and Pat Marin at the Board of Ed on other matters, budgetary matters, on December 7th. And what she had stated then was the submission was in and it was due any day. So we should have gotten the November payment in the last week or so.
Okay.
And then we would be back on the 2-week. But the project is actually scheduled to be over, I think, they're opening in February, I think. But we did an analysis, and almost all the money is either been spent or encumbered. And I think it's 17 million spent and 17 million has been encumbered. So we're way behind the queue as far as being reimbursed. So I don't know if it's going to be, we're going to get a very large payment in January or whatever, but that's where we are with the November payment. It should have came in the last week or so.
Thank you.
just a note, that payment, which should come any day now that the problems have been solved, is $3.87 million, and it should come in the month of December, should come any day now, I think. And when that's done, we will have received, through those 4 payments, $16.1 million, and the thing is on track.
Thank you. Okay, can I have a motion to accept the comptroller's report? I think that was the assessor's report. I don't have a motion on the comptrollers. Now I have a motion from Mr. Weisbrod and a second from Ms. Hess. All in favor of accepting the comptroller's report, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? That item is carried 12-0-0. Okay. Okay, the next item on our agenda is the treasurer's report showing investing portfolio activity for the month of month of November. Are there any questions on the treasurer's report? Hearing none, I note that the BET has received the report. The next item on the agenda are standing committee reports. This evening, we have a report from Mr. Weisbrod, Chair of the BET Audit Committee, and Ms. Moriarty, Chair of the BET Budget Committee. We'll start with Mr. Weisbrod.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I will defer any comments about the Audit Committee in light of the fact that we have as new business 3 motions to make, and we'll cover it at that time.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Moriarty.
Yes, I just wanted to update the board on the calendar for our budget deliberations. The departments and the Board of Ed are nearing the end of their submission process. The responsibility then shifts to the first selectman with the support of Roland Geiger to prepare the consolidated budget, but just the activity is going to come to us fairly soon. On January 24th is the presentation by the first selectman, the Board of Ed, and that's followed by a public hearing being held by the Budget Committee. We then have meetings set on January 31st will be the meeting with the Board of Education. And then we have 7 additional days of meetings with town departments as well as the Finance Department to look at fixed charges. The department schedule has not yet been established. I'll do that in January. But during the week of February 4th, we're meeting on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. The week of February 11th, we're meeting on Monday. The week of February 18th, we're meeting Wednesday and Friday. The week of February 25th, we're meeting Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. And if necessary for decision day 2, we'll meet on the Monday on the March 4th. So that work is coming up, but I know everyone has it on their calendar, and we'll get the department schedules posted so the RTM and the public will have access to that schedule as well as soon as it's developed.
Thank you, Ms. Moriarty.
Did you want to mention the CIP here?
There were some
Oh.
comments due, but.
Yeah, so tomorrow evening, there will be a presentation of the, I think, a preliminary CIP by the first selectman and a public hearing as well, starting at 6 o'clock. And I believe it's in the Cone Room, thank you, the Cone Room. So if all of you find yourself free, maybe you'll join me here tomorrow evening as well. Okay, 6 o'clock. 6 o'clock. Which brings me right on time to our special project team reports. And this evening, we have a report from the Nathaniel Witherell Strategic Planning Committee. We're joined by the chair of this special project team, Art Norton, and Nancy Weissler, in addition to our regular members. And Mr. Norton, would you like to join us and give a report?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Good evening. It's good to be with you again. Well, the committee has been very busy for the last few months, and actually it's going to get very, very, very busy for the next 5 weeks, beginning on Wednesday. We have 3 subcommittees that have been working very diligently, one dealing with HDG, the HDG contract, the second special committee, a subcommittee dealing with the contract with O'Connor Davies, and the third subcommittee dealing with issues involving wages, benefits, etc., at Nathaniel Witherell. On this Wednesday, I think it's if I look at this agenda correctly, 1 o'clock in the Mazza Room, we're going to have a presentation in regard to the financial statements for the last 3 years that have been prepared by O'Connor Davies, Tom Marion, who's a CPA with O'Connor Davies, and I believe he's also going to provide us with footnotes to the statements for the last 3 years at Witherell, as well as he's going to give us some guidelines on best business practices for Witherell, especially in the accounting area. And I believe sometime this week, I don't think it happened today, but either today or tomorrow, we're going to receive the first half of
It happened an hour ago.
Did I?
Yeah.
I haven't seen it.
No, you haven't yet. You'll have it in an hour.
We'll have it in an hour?
Yeah.
That's going to be the first half of the report that's coming, draft report that's coming from HDG. And the second half, I believe, is going to come to us next week.
Next week, yeah.
That's going to give us some work to do over the holidays because we're going to have a webinar on the 10th of January with them, followed by a meeting, I believe, on January 23rd, and which we're going to have, I believe, extensive discussion with HDG on their report. That meeting, I believe, is going to be at 1 o'clock, and I believe it's going to be in this room. Am I correct on that? And then they're coming out to see us week following, and they're going to make a presentation with I believe, a completed report to us, to you, meaning the full BET, to the Board of Nathaniel Witherell. And all these meetings, obviously, are public meetings and open to the public.
Art, excuse me for interrupting, but the presentation to the full BET and the Board of Nathaniel Witherell will be at 5:30 on the 23rd. Is that
Of
correct?
January.
January, in this room as well.
Right.
So the 1 o'clock meeting is
A
the,
webinar.
No, it's
no, it's
for the committee.
the committee, there'll be first a committee
Oh, okay, on that day.
meeting, right, on that meeting, and then there'll be a 5:30 presentation to both boards.
And prior to that, on the 10th of January, we're going to have a webinar with them. Now, between the time in which we have to complete a report next week, we have to become comfortable with it, meaning the committee has to become comfortable with that report, and any changes or additions or revisions that we want to have made to that, as well as understanding what they're presenting and preparing to us, will prepare us for the meetings on January 23rd. So that means we have a lot of work to do in virtually the next 5 weeks. Hopefully all of you will be able to join us at many of those meetings. That's where we are at this point, but we're, both of the contracts we had with O'Connor Davies as well as HDG had completion dates of November 30th, but we've stopped the clock on both of them, so that, and they've agreed, and we're continuing with them. And as we were promised a few minutes ago, we're going to have half that report from HDG. Oh, it's a draft. It's a draft report at this point in time, I guess later this evening. Is that correct?
Yes.
Good. As I get it on my cell phone, so I didn't see it.
Not this one.
Not, okay, I thought I was on the list when they're sending it out, so I thought I would see it as soon as you did as well. That's where we are.
So, Mr. Norton, thank you for the update, and I'm opening it up to the BET to see whether there are any questions that anyone would like to raise at this time. Comments as well. Ms. Weisler, I didn't know whether you wanted to add anything. Thank you for joining us. Okay.
Nancy and Beth are the other subcommittee. They've been working very diligently and with extensive meetings regarding wages, benefits, and HDG has been very helpful in presenting us with information based upon both industry standards as well as what's common in this particular area. I guess we'd call it the southwestern New England, New York, New Jersey area. There are extensive differences between what are currently being provided at Witherell and what is standard in the industry. So we're going to have some interesting meetings in the next few weeks.
Thank you. I do want to emphasize that it would be terrific if as many members of the full BET can attend the upcoming meetings to understand both the financials as well as the recommendations that we are going to get from HDG. It will inform a lot of our discussions, and the committee has really been very diligent and hard at work over the last year, and I particularly want to thank our non-current BET participants, Mr. Norton and Ms. Weisler, for continuing on this committee and helping us sort these very important questions out.
And in some of the preparation for what Tom Marion and O'Connor Davies will be talking with us on Wednesday, Deborah Hess has been very helpful in preparing some of those things for Mr. Marion. Also, that meeting I believe is going to be attended by Larry Simon, who attended our last meeting, and we had some discussions about some of the input. Tom Marion was unable to attend that meeting, or there was some confusion about where and when that meeting was being scheduled, so we have rescheduled it for this Wednesday.
Ms. Moyer already put that on the agenda, that I general listed the HR committee and education liaison as having a report. I did not that to be marked, but I will defer to the chair of the HR committee and the education liaison if you want to say anything else.
My only report would be the resolution that's coming.
Okay, thank you. And
I can give just a very quick update as members of the BET know that we are working collaboratively with the Board of Education on a study on their capital review processes. And we had a meeting, a project update meeting on December 11th. The consultant is diligently working. They've interviewed 18 people. They've gotten a lot of documentation on processes and on the projects that they're looking at to determine what gaps might exist and what's going well in the current systems. The next step is they will be developing a findings and recommendations draft report, which will be discussed during the week of January 7th. We're scheduling to meet at that point. And their project completion is being targeted for the end of January.
almost exact timing. Okay, which brings us to the next item on our agenda, which is old business, for which we have no items, and then new business, for which we have a number of new items. The first item of new business is the approval of the CAFR for fiscal year 2018, and I'm going to turn the floor over to Mr. Weisbrod and Mr. Menarski for their remarks.
I will let Mr. Minarski lead, and then we'll go from there.
Okay. This is an annual event. The CAFR has to be completed by December 31st and filed with the Office of Policy and Management. What we do every December is we get presentations from the auditors, RSM US LLP, formerly known as McGladrey. They gave a presentation last Thursday for about 2 hours. The partner for the firm, Jen Katz, meticulously walked through the CAFR from the very front to the end and answered questions from the 4 audit committee members, and there was 2 other BET members in attendance for a total of 6. The questions were good. Jen Katz did a great job. There was 3 pieces to the presentation. There was the CAFR, the Comprehensive Annual Financial Report. I guess the one highlight of the CAFR report is that we got a clean, unmodified opinion. Good news. The good news was the operating results were very good. The GAAP fund balance went from about 54.7 up to just shy of $60 million. The results overall were good. The only fund that actually had negative results that were substantive was Nathaniel Witherall on a GAAP, generally accepted accounting principles, with a negative 2.3 fund balance. On a budgetary basis, they had a break even with a slight $42,000 surplus. That was the CAFR presentation. They also gave a very quick presentation on the single audit, the federal and state single audit, and basically it was uneventful. The third piece is the management letter, and everybody has received copies. There was 2 management letter comments in it. In my 15 years here, it's probably the softest management letter. I'll talk about the 2 comments in reverse order. The second one was the recording of the Town Aid Road, $374,000. Revenue received June 19th. As a revenue, we got written up and were ordered to change it to a deferred revenue, which means that we couldn't recognize the revenue in 17-18. We had to recognize the revenue in 18-19. This is a practice that we did for probably, I've only been here 15, Roland says 20 years. So we were written up, and we now have to record any revenues that don't have expenditures in this area. This is grant revenue from the state. It has to be recorded. It's deferred revenue, and then in the next year they'll flip. The first comment was a little bit more serious. The chief accountant left in the summertime, and we experienced some learning curve difficulties going through the CAFR, and we needed the assistance of the outside auditors, RSM, which helped us. During the course of the closing of the books, there was probably between 6 and 10 adjusting entries. Nothing touches cash, which were basically in the area of the due to, due froms. We get adjusting entries every year, but the basis for the comment was the lack of succession planning. Now, as I stated earlier, we do have key positions backed up, whether it's the budget director, the comptroller, when the comptroller goes out on leave, or the treasurer decides to leave. We never anticipated the chief accountant leaving so abruptly, so we didn't have that position adequately backed up. And we didn't have a transition period. The chief accountant was out on medical leave during the period of the height of the audit. So what we did as a response to the management letter, and what we're doing is, number one, we hired a chief accountant who was a CPA, graduate of the University of Pennsylvania. She started October 1st. She assisted in the year-end audit, but her priorities were the daily, the weekly, and the monthly tasks. And as a result of the lack of succession planning, we've decided collectively in the department to break up pieces of that function and give them to different people in the department as a backup. So that's basically, you've got 3 bullets there. You could vote collectively or one at a time, the CAFR, the single audit, and the management letter, and I'll defer to Dave Weisbrod, or I'll answer any questions. Did you want to follow up, Dave?
Yeah, I'm going to follow up very, very briefly. I think Pete covered it extremely well. Only to say that I was present at the last year's CAFR, which was a little bit more, I don't want to say complex, but a little bit more stressful than this year's, which was not stressful at all. The CAFR was clean, as Pete mentioned. Deborah, in particular, did a lot of querying on some of the numbers, which needed a little bit of tweaking, I would say, and what we agreed to do was that the audit committee approve the CAFR subject to final numbers being presented to me as the chair of the audit committee, and for my determination that they don't represent material changes. We were all of the view that the nature of the, if you want to say challenges or corrections that are needed, are not material at this time. So we don't expect anything material to arise from that. But I will, in the role that I have, based on the vote we took at the audit committee, alert this committee before the year end if, in my view, the changes turn out to be material, which I do not expect will be the case. With regard to the state and local audit, I think there may have been one reference to the cards as associated with the parking department, which is an old issue that's now been remediated. Again, not material, not significant, but it was the only reference whatsoever in that audit to anything specific. In the management letter, just reminding the members of this of the BET that there are really 3 categories that the auditors use. One is a material weakness, second is a significant deficiency, and then third, they may identify other control deficiencies. There were 0 material weaknesses, 0 significant deficiencies, and then the only 2 items that were listed as control questions are the ones that Pete just took us through. I think that more or less covers it. I'll turn to Deborah and Andy or Jill if they wanted to add anything.
Yeah, I think I thought that was great. I thought it was very well done. I thought the partner did an excellent job of walking us through the CAFR and explained it very well in simple terms. The only other takeaways that I had is that there are some pending accounting, and you referred to the lease accounting, but there's a fair amount of other rules that are coming that could impact the town, and even the way we do our financials, in that it's moving closer to sort of a corporate model where the auditor needs to be a little less involved in the preparation of the CAFR as if maybe it hasn't. And so that could just change sort of our process on a go-forward basis. I think that's still a couple of years out. But that was, for me, another big takeaway from the presentation from the auditors. But I thought it was very well done, and I really appreciated the time. It was very thorough. So thank you, Pete and team and David.
Any other comments from other members of the Audit Committee?
I just wanted to thank Mr. Mynarski for addressing the two management issues so rapidly and allaying any concerns that people might have that to ensure that we're really addressing both the succession planning and the coverage in the incident. And to Ms. Hess's comments that ask that you continually monitor the workload of your department to ensure that we're appropriately staffed to respond in the future.
So I guess with that, we would make a motion, or I will make a motion, that we approve these three reports, the CAFR, the audit of the state and federal programs, and the management letter.
Okay, so we have a motion by Mr. Weisbrod on all three of these items, a second by Ms. Hess, yes? A second by Ms. Hess with the notation that the motion is to accept the CAFR, the federal single and state single audits, and the management letter, all for the fiscal year ending June 30th, 2018, with the understanding that the chair of the audit committee, Mr. Weisbrod, will look at any changes to the documents and will advise the full board if he deems any of those changes to be material. And if they are non-material changes, it will just be executed and submitted as a matter of course. Okay, that is the motion. All in favor, please say aye and raise your hands.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? Those items, three items have carried 12-0-0. Thank you, Mr. Mynarski and Mr. Weisbrod, which brings us to our next item of new business, which is a resolution concerning cash management. Mr. Weisbrod, on behalf of the Investment Advisory Committee, can you please move the resolution that we have in the materials and on our
Right.
table in front of us?
Thank you very much. I think in front of each of us is the cash management resolution with the markups in red. Let me take you through why we're submitting this and why we're doing it at this meeting. We have a program for investing in CDs through Alvarez and Marcel that you're all familiar with. Alvarez and Marcel elected to exit this business and gave us 60-day notice accordingly. This is a laddered CD program where money is invested in CDs, all under $250,000 and all within the FDIC ceiling. After consultation with the treasurer, or the town treasurer actually made a presentation to the Investment Advisory Committee suggesting that we use the same broker that Alvarez used and purchase the CDs directly. The broker's name is on the second page or third page of the document that you have, and it's Financial Northeastern Securities, Inc. And they're a broker located in New Jersey who really has a principal share of the CD market, if you will, for brokered CDs, purchasing brokered CDs. We would also engage with a company called Clearwater to do the analytics. So in order to make sure that the CDs that are purchased have what's called an IDC score, as well as to make sure that no prohibited entities such as Wells Fargo, which is prohibited under the statutes of the state, are included in the program, or that we add to existing positions that we have with the banks that we list on the front page of the cash resolution. So one change is to add this broker, Financial Northeastern Securities. Now, Financial Northeastern Securities, in turn, uses Dreyfus and the Mellon Bank, which you'll see on the second page of the cash resolution. Dreyfus as a mutual fund for investing liquidity associated with this program, incidental liquidity, I would say, and Bank BNY Mellon, who is the custodian, who would act as the custodian for holding the CDs. So they would need to be included as well under the CD, under the cash resolution. So that covers the, and then as a result of this, we'll be able to continue the investment in CDs once Alvarez and Marcel exit the business. The other name that's on the cash management the resolution is JP Morgan Securities. We already have JP Morgan Bank as included under the cash management resolution, but now we're seeking to include the broker-dealer arm of JP Morgan as the vehicle through which we would acquire the U.S. Treasuries, which was something that we've been anxious to do for a long time because of the yields associated with the U.S. Treasuries. So that summarizes and I would only add that the yields, we have two issues here. One is that the yields associated with the CD program are very attractive compared to the yields that we would get from some of the banks that we do business with. For example, JP Morgan's interest rate, I think, is 0.8%, whereas under the Alvarez program, the 6-month duration is a 2.55% yield. So it's quite a difference. For that matter, U.S. Treasuries also have a 2.55 interest rate for a 6-month maturity. So the notion of investing in both U.S. Treasuries and in continuing the current program in CDs is beneficial. And finally, I would say it's a diversification. Not only do the yields make sense, but we have a substantial concentration, as is in Toronto Dominion. I think we have over $60 million on deposit at Toronto Dominion. It's a fine bank. I'm not concerned about Toronto Dominion, but it's probably an excessive concentration, and therefore by investing in U.S. government debt and continuing in the successor, if you will, to the Alvarez and Marcel program, we diversify further the exposure that we have in the program. So that's the background for the cash management resolution. Any questions?
Okay, so we have a motion by Mr. Weisbrod. Thank you for the background. We need a second. Second.
By Ms. Hess. No?
Seconded by Mr. Deuce. Okay. Is there any discussion on this item or questions for either Mr. Weisbrod or Mr. Mynarski? Ms. Moriarty.
Through the chair, I just wanted to ask both the controller and the IAC, members of the IAC committee, there's some additional provisions that the town will have to implement to track limitations in terms of the amount per bank and certain institutions that we can't invest with. Do those add a burden, or do we have systems in place to be able to handle that?
So I'll just start, and then maybe Ms. Mynarski wants to add. We did just cover that at the IAC, that unlike the Alvarez program, where Alvarez is acting as an investment advisor, in this case, we will no longer have an investment advisor. Coincidentally, we save money in that, but that's not the main feature. The question then did come up, just as you're asking, Ms. Moriarty, as to whether that burden creates, if you will, an operational risk if we miss maturities or if we make errors, since we're going to be making these investments on our own. And Kathleen Murphy and Natasha both were confident that given the volume, we don't have a huge volume of individual CDs. This is something, and that the ladder is such that the maturities they're not bunched and they're not really many coming at a single time, that this did not present a burden on their part. They thought it was very easy to execute.
I can't add anything. His answer is better than mine.
I will say, at the risk of being provocative, but briefly, that coincidentally we did learn that after the extensive discussion we had with the Neuberger custodial, I can't resist this, that we will have a custodial arrangement with BNY Mellon that will not have privity.
Well, thank you, Mr. Weisbrod, for highlighting that for all of us. Does anyone have any questions for
I just had to, in the interest of full disclosure, but all of us, including the town treasurer, were comfortable with that situation. Thank you.
Okay. Hearing no questions, we have a resolution in front of us that's been moved by Mr. Weisbrot, seconded by Mr. Deuce. Resolution concerning cash management. All in favor, please say aye and raise your hands. Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? That item has carried 12-0-0. The last item of new business we have before us tonight is an item that was requested to be put on our agenda by the chair of our Human Resources Committee. Materials were distributed slightly earlier today, but since we did not have full time to review them, this is going to be a first read item. Mr. Turner, please advise the BET.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I would put the proposed resolution under the category of administrative corrections, if you will. Let me give you a little history on that. As you are aware, every even number of year, the Human Resources Committee looks at the competitiveness of registrar voter salaries as well as the stipend compensation. We did that this year in February, and also we proposed and the DEP adopted.
Sorry, or just that microphone, maybe that one, Pete?
Yeah, get on the mic.
You guys want microphone? Yours works?
So Jeff, yours is off? Okay. So we did that this year specifically. The Human Resource Committee took up the item in very early February, voting specifically to increase the registrar of voters' salary by 2.5% for calendar 2019 and by 2.5% for calendar 2020. And also part of that resolution was to pay the registrar of voters a single stipend in the event there was a single party primary. Again, that was passed by the full BET. It was later pointed out to the committee that what had been passed was not in keeping with historical precedent, specifically that if there is a single party primary, that both registrar voters would receive the $1,500 stipend. And that is the only difference between the resolution that you have before you was sent earlier today versus what the full BET adopted in its February 20th meeting earlier this year. So again, I would put it under the category of administrative correction, and I'm very sorry that we've had the delay and the oversight, and we would still have that had no one brought it to our attention. But now what is before you is reflective of the past 4 years of practice in the town of Greenwich. Regarding budget impact, obviously this would be $1,500 per primary, be it a single party primary or dual party primary, just to make sure that we're dotting the I's and crossing the T's on that. Madam Chairman.
Okay, Ms. Pasliotis.
Thank you, Tony. And what Tony said did reflect what happened in our committee. However, since this is a first read, I would like to propose some amendments to make it consistent with the past resolutions, because there were some minor changes that do not make it consistent. On the be it resolved paragraph,
Ms.
Yes.
Pasliotis, sorry to interrupt you, but perhaps what we can do, since we're going to be taking up this item in January, if you could give us conceptually,
sure.
then we can look at the specific
The
language.
be it resolved paragraph only refers to fiscal year 2019. In actuality, it should refer to both calendar year 2019 and calendar year 2020. And that's basically the only change that I have. And other than some Scribner errors, but that's another issue. And that should also be reflected in the explanos up above.
Thank you. Are there, Mr. Turner, did you want to add something?
I'll be sure to team with Ms. Vasiliotis on that, so we can have that in writing for everyone well in advance of the January.
That would be terrific, and I personally would appreciate a little bit of background of why you think it was omitted, as well as what the potential budget impact could be over the course of the entire term, and whether you're proposing that it be open-ended or whether there be a cap. So, are there further questions for the HR committee on this item? Okay, so that will return to us in January, and that's the end of our new items this evening, which brings us to a very brief chair's report. One item was already discussed, the presentation of the capital improvement plan tomorrow, and my second was to wish everyone a safe and happy holidays. This is the last full regular meeting of the 2018 calendar year. When we return, it will be 2019. I'll have to adjust all my notes. So I really wish everyone really a wonderful, wonderful holiday. Happy New Year. And I turn it now to the last item of business, which is the approval of the BET meeting minutes. You've all received minutes from the October 23rd and November 19th regular meetings of the BET. And I'm going to turn the mic over to Clerk of the BET, Ms. Crumick, to introduce this item.
I'd like to make a motion to approve the minutes of the BET meeting held on October 23rd, 2018.
Seconded.
Okay, the minutes have been moved by Ms. Crumick and seconded by Mr. Raymer. Are there any comments or any discussion on these two items? I will take them up together. Hearing none, all in favor to... Sorry, moved, you only moved one, I'm sorry. So on the October 23rd minutes, all in favor, please say aye. 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 Any opposed? Any abstentions? That item has carried 12-0-0.
I'd like to make a motion to approve the minutes of the BET meeting held on November 19th, 2018.
Okay, the November 19th regular meeting minutes have been moved by Ms. Crumick, seconded by Mr. Raymer. Any comments or discussion? All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? Those minutes have carried 12-0-0. Mr. Deuce.
I move we adjourn.
Okay. And the meeting is adjourned at 7:42. Thank you.